It happened behind closed doors, without ceremony, without warning, and without Camilla in the room. King Charles made a decision so severe it sent shockwaves through the heart of the monarchy. In a single move, he ended Camilla's constitutional role, stripping her of authority that once seemed untouchable. And in her place, he turned to the one royal known for discipline over diplomacy, Princess Anne. What followed was not a reshuffle, it was a rupture. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The decision was executed with surgical precision, leaving no space for debate, no opportunity for persuasion, and no margin for reversal. It arrived quietly, communicated through channels designed to prevent leaks and limit reaction. The timing alone raised questions. This was not a response to public pressure or media speculation. It came at a moment when the palace appeared outwardly calm, making the internal shock even more profound. Those closest to the process sensed immediately that this was not an impulsive adjustment, but the conclusion of a long, unresolved struggle that had finally reached its breaking point. Camilla's absence from the decision was not accidental. It was deliberate, calculated, and symbolic. By excluding her from the conversation entirely, Charles sent a message that the matter was no longer open for discussion. The authority she once exercised, the access she once assumed, vanished without negotiation. Within the palace, that silence spoke louder than any formal announcement. It confirmed that this was not a temporary suspension or a symbolic downgrade, but a complete and permanent removal from constitutional relevance. Reactions inside the palace unfolded in hushed disbelief. Staff members recalibrated in real time, unsure which protocols still applied and which loyalties had just become liabilities. Senior figures exchanged careful words, weighing every sentence, aware that power had shifted abruptly and decisively. There was no visible chaos, but there was unmistakable tension, the kind that follows a rupture rather than a routine correction. It became clear almost immediately that this decision would redraw internal lines in ways no one could ignore. What stood out most was the speed with which Princess Anne was positioned to take over. There were no extended consultations, no visible consensus building, and no attempt to soften the transition. Charles did not seek approval because he did not need it. Anne's selection was based on something far more practical than popularity or optics. She represented order, restraint, control. In a moment when ambiguity had become dangerous, Charles chose certainty over comfort. The absence of consultation only reinforced the severity of the move. This was not about compromise or appeasement. It was about restoring boundaries that had blurred beyond repair. Those paying close attention could already sense that this decision had been driven by mounting internal pressure that had been managed quietly for far too long. The monarchy had reached a point where preserving appearances risked greater damage than confronting reality, and as the initial shock settled, one truth became unavoidable. This was not a chapter closing at random. It was the result of tensions that had been building beneath the surface, ignored until they could no longer be contained. But to understand why Charles took such a drastic step, we must rewind to the quiet tensions that made Camilla's role increasingly impossible to defend. Camilla's rise within the monarchy was never smooth, but in recent months, something shifted. Whispers turned into resistance. Support hardened into silence. Her constitutional influence, once tolerated, then defended, became a source of unease. Behind polite smiles, senior figures began questioning whether her presence in state matters was stabilizing the crown or quietly undermining it. What began as expanded involvement slowly crossed into unfamiliar territory. Camilla's influence extended beyond ceremonial expectations, seeping into conversations where neutrality once reigned. Decisions that should have moved through established channels began arriving pre-shaped, their outcomes seemingly decided before formal discussion even began. To some, it felt efficient. To others, it felt unsettling. The distinction between support and authority blurred, and with it came a growing sense that the balance of the monarchy was being recalibrated without consent. Discomfort grew quietly among senior royals and long-serving advisors. No one challenged her openly at first. They rarely do. Instead, concerns surfaced in fragments, hesitations during briefings, careful wording in internal memos, a noticeable reluctance to involve her in sensitive matters. The unease wasn't personal, it was structural. Camilla's presence in constitutional spaces began to feel less like reinforcement and more like distortion, as though the rules were bending around her rather than guiding her role. Claims began circulating that the line between personal authority and constitutional duty had blurred beyond recognition. Influence that once felt advisory now carried the weight of expectation. Suggestions sounded like directives. Endorsements felt like decisions. Those tasked with protecting the integrity of the institution sensed a dangerous precedent forming, one where proximity to the crown translated into unchecked leverage. It wasn't that Camilla sought power overtly. It was that power seemed to gather around her without resistance. Internal warnings followed, subtle at first, then increasingly urgent. Advisors flagged concerns about perception, about optics, about long-term risk. They questioned whether this expansion of influence could withstand scrutiny should circumstances shift. Yet those warnings went unaddressed, absorbed into the background noise of palace life where patience often substitutes for action. Each delay compounded the problem, allowing unease to harden into quiet opposition. The emotional cost of that opposition was significant. Relationships strained under the weight of unspoken disagreement. Trust eroded as staff members found themselves navigating loyalties rather than responsibilities. Camilla, for her part, appeared unfazed, maintaining a public confidence that suggested awareness without acknowledgement. But behind that composure, the atmosphere had changed. Silence followed her where conversation once flowed freely. Support lingered, but it no longer felt assured. Foreshadowing became impossible to ignore. The monarchy thrives on continuity, but it cannot survive sustained ambiguity at its core. As Camilla's role expanded, so did the risk that her position would be interpreted not as supportive, but as politically dangerous. The institution began to feel exposed, vulnerable to criticism that could no longer be deflected by tradition alone. Those watching closely understood that something would have to give. And while Camilla remained publicly confident, King Charles was privately confronting a reality he could no longer ignore. For King Charles, loyalty and legacy collided in ways he never anticipated. Torn between personal devotion and constitutional responsibility, he found himself facing a choice no monarch wants to make: protect the crown, or protect the person beside him. As pressure mounted, Charles reached a breaking point where hesitation became more dangerous than action. This struggle unfolded quietly, far from public view, but it consumed him relentlessly. Charles had spent a lifetime preparing for kingship, yet nothing in that preparation addressed the emotional cost of governing while deeply entangled in personal loyalty. Camilla was not merely a consort, she was a constant, a confidante, a presence tied to his private sense of stability. But the crown does not recognize intimacy. It recognizes consequence. And Charles began to understand that every day he delayed a decision, the institution absorbed another fracture. Voices he trusted began to weigh in, not with drama, but with gravity. Constitutional experts and senior advisors urged clarity, warning that ambiguity at the heart of the monarchy was eroding confidence from within. They did not question his devotion. They questioned sustainability. Their counsel was firm, unemotional, and increasingly urgent. The message was clear: the longer Camilla's role remained undefined, the harder it would be to defend the monarchy's structure when challenged. The emotional toll of that indecision was profound. Charles carried it in silence, aware that any visible uncertainty would be interpreted as weakness. He felt trapped between two identities, husband and sovereign, each demanding loyalty the other could not fully share. Nights passed without resolution. Conversations ended without closure. The burden of choosing began to manifest not as doubt, but as exhaustion. And exhaustion, he knew, was dangerous for a king. Gradually, fear replaced hesitation. Not fear of backlash, but fear of legacy. Charles began to sense that history would not remember intentions, only outcomes. He imagined a future where this unresolved tension defined his reign, where his reluctance to act allowed instability to deepen unchecked. The thought was unbearable. He had waited decades to wear the crown, not to preside over its quiet weakening. The moment of acceptance came without ceremony. There was no dramatic confrontation, no sudden revelation, just a stark understanding that Camilla's constitutional role had become unsustainable not because of malice, but because proximity had blurred lines that could no longer remain unclear. Charles realized that protecting the monarchy meant drawing boundaries he had once hoped would never be necessary. Love, in this context, could not outweigh duty. With that realization came resolve. The decision, once formed, felt irreversible. Charles understood that this act would redefine how his reign was judged not by affection, but by authority. It would be seen as either a necessary correction or a devastating betrayal. Either way, it would mark a turning point. The crown would emerge altered, and so would he. Foreshadowing hung heavy in the air as Charles prepared for what came next. This was not merely about removal, it was about restoration. Stability demanded more than subtraction, it required replacement. Someone capable of enforcing order without emotional entanglement, someone whose authority could not be questioned. But removing Camilla was only half the equation. Charles needed someone who could restore order without hesitation. When King Charles looked for a replacement, he didn't search for popularity or comfort. He searched for control. Princess Anne had never courted favor, never softened her stance, and never blurred duty with emotion. In a moment demanding discipline over diplomacy, Charles made a calculated choice, one that would immediately change the balance of power inside the monarchy. Anne's reputation had been forged over decades of consistency, not charm. She was known for understanding the monarchy not as a family brand, but as a constitutional mechanism that only functions when rules are respected without exception. Where others relied on consensus or careful presentation, Anne relied on clarity. She did not negotiate with ambiguity. That reputation made her uniquely qualified for a role that required authority without explanation and firmness without apology. Trust followed her naturally, not because she sought it, but because she never appeared to need it. Senior officials knew that Anne operated without hidden agendas or personal ambitions. She did not cultivate alliances. She did not collect influence. She executed responsibility and moved on. In a moment when confidence in internal processes had begun to erode, that predictability became invaluable. Charles understood that restoring stability required someone whose motives could not be questioned, even in private. Anne's history of avoiding controversy was not accidental, it was intentional. She kept personal matters separate from institutional duty with near military discipline. Emotional entanglement had no place in her public role, and she guarded that boundary fiercely. Unlike others who struggled to separate loyalty from obligation, Anne never confused the two. That distinction mattered now more than ever. The monarchy could not afford blurred lines again. The contrast between Anne's authority and Camilla's approach was immediate and unmistakable. Where Camilla's influence had grown organically and informally, Anne's authority was structured and precise. There was no ambiguity about where her role began or ended. She did not interpret responsibility expansively. She defined it narrowly and enforced it rigorously. For those inside the palace, this shift felt abrupt but stabilizing, like firm ground after a period of uncertainty. What surprised many was the speed with which Anne accepted the role. There was no hesitation, no request for clarification, no negotiation of terms. She understood what was being asked of her, and she understood why. That immediacy sent its own message. This was not an honor to be weighed, it was a duty to be assumed. The monarchy, in her view, did not require reassurance, it required order. Foreshadowing lingered in the quiet efficiency of her acceptance. Those who knew Anne well recognized the signs. She would not soften her approach to ease discomfort. She would not slow decisions to preserve feelings. Her leadership would be uncompromising by design. And that, precisely, was the point. Charles had not chosen Anne to manage optics. He had chosen her to enforce boundaries that should never have been tested. As Anne stepped into position, the shift became irreversible. Lines of authority sharpened, expectations reset, and while some found comfort in the return to structure, others sensed the weight of what had just occurred. Because Anne's presence meant closure, not transition, finality, not negotiation. But while Anne stepped forward without hesitation, Camilla was about to learn just how final Charles' decision truly was. Camilla did not hear the news from the press, but she did not hear it gently either. The moment she realized her constitutional authority was gone, the shift was immediate. What followed was not public outrage, but private devastation. Years of positioning, influence, and legitimacy vanished in a single decision she never believed Charles would make. The initial reaction was disbelief, the kind that freezes thought before emotion catches up. Camilla had navigated opposition before. She had endured criticism, resistance, even hostility. But this felt different. This was not another storm to weather. This was final. The authority she had come to exercise carefully, gradually, and with intention had been removed without negotiation. The realization settled heavily, not as anger, but as shock. A sense that something permanent had just closed behind her. Betrayal followed quickly, sharper and harder to contain. This was not merely a professional loss, it was deeply personal. Camilla had believed that whatever pressures existed, Charles would shield her from the most severe consequences. She had trusted the bond between them to outweigh institutional discomfort. That trust shattered in an instant. The crown, she now understood, had been chosen over companionship, and that choice left a wound that protocol could not soften. She questioned the decision, quietly at first. Not in defiance, but in search of explanation. There were conversations meant to clarify, to reassess, to reopen dialogue. None of them led anywhere. The message was consistent and unmistakable. The decision had been made, documented and enacted. There would be no appeal, no revision. For Camilla, this was perhaps the most jarring realization of all, not that she had lost authority, but that her voice no longer carried weight in the space she once occupied. The personal cost became apparent almost immediately. Without constitutional standing, her presence within the palace shifted. Access narrowed. Conversations paused when she entered rooms that once welcomed her. Advisors recalibrated their tone, careful not to imply relevance where none officially remained. Camilla felt the loss not as humiliation, but as erasure. A slow fading from the center of institutional gravity, replaced by polite distance and procedural restraint. Palace dynamics changed overnight. Alliances recalculated themselves instinctively, like a system responding to new rules. Staff adjusted loyalties without malice, simply following authority where it now resided. Camilla sensed the difference in the smallest details, the absence of consultation, the lack of anticipation, the quiet certainty that her influence had ended. The shift was not loud, but it was absolute. Foreshadowing loomed in every interaction that followed. This was not a temporary withdrawal or a symbolic reduction. It was a structural change that would permanently alter her standing within the monarchy. Camilla understood that even if her personal relationship with Charles endured, her institutional role was gone, and with it, the power to shape outcomes beyond the private sphere. As the weight of that truth settled, Camilla retreated from the constitutional stage, carrying the knowledge that history had just rewritten her position. And as Camilla retreated from the constitutional stage, Princess Anne moved swiftly to assert control. Princess Anne wasted no time easing into her new responsibilities. Her first moves signaled clarity, firmness, and zero tolerance for ambiguity. Where Camilla's role had been fluid, Anne's was sharply defined. Inside the palace, the message was unmistakable: the era of personal influence was over, replaced by strict constitutional order. The changes began immediately and without fanfare. Procedures that had lingered in grey areas were clarified, rerouted, and locked into place. Meetings were restructured. Lines of authority were reasserted. Decisions that once drifted between informal channels were pulled back into formal process. Anne did not announce reforms, she enacted them. The speed alone unsettled those accustomed to softer transitions, but it also eliminated uncertainty. For the first time in months, the institution knew exactly where responsibility began and ended. That clarity had an immediate stabilizing effect. Operations that had slowed under hesitation regained momentum. Advisors who had grown cautious began speaking plainly again, reassured by the return of predictable structure. Anne's presence removed the need for interpretation. There were no signals to decode, no personalities to manage, only rules to follow. The monarchy, at its core, functions best under that kind of discipline, and Anne understood it instinctively. Still, not everyone welcomed the shift. Quiet resistance surfaced among those who had aligned themselves closely with Camilla. It was subtle missed cues, delayed cooperation, carefully worded objections, but Anne noticed all of it. She did not confront it emotionally or publicly. She simply enforced protocol with consistency, allowing resistance to exhaust itself against immovable boundaries. Loyalty, in her view, did not excuse deviation. Duty superseded attachment. Anne refused to engage in emotional politics, even when provoked. She did not comment on Camilla's removal, nor did she acknowledge the personal fallout rippling through the palace. That silence was intentional. By declining to personalize the transition, Anne reinforced the message that this was not a feud or a punishment. It was a correction, an institutional recalibration that required focus, not commentary. As days passed, constitutional boundaries were restored with almost surgical precision. Roles were redefined, responsibilities were compartmentalized. The monarchy's internal machinery began operating with renewed efficiency, stripped of ambiguity and driven by procedure rather than personality. For some, the adjustment felt cold. For others, it felt overdue. But for the institution itself, it felt stabilizing. Foreshadowing hung in the air as Anne settled into her role. These were not cosmetic changes. They were foundational. Those watching closely understood that Anne's approach left little room for compromise going forward. Once boundaries are reinforced, they tend to invite further reinforcement. Anne was not interested in partial reform. She believed in systems that hold under pressure, and pressure was clearly building. The deeper implication was impossible to ignore. Anne's leadership signaled that this was only the beginning. If one role could be redefined so decisively, others could follow. The monarchy had entered a phase where efficiency and clarity outweighed sentiment, and that recalibration would not remain confined to palace corridors for long. But this shift in authority didn't just affect palace staff, it sent ripples through the entire royal family. This was more than a constitutional correction, it was a family earthquake. Alliances shifted, conversations stopped, loyalties were quietly tested. As Anne assumed Camilla's former duties, the royal family was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Hierarchy had changed, and not everyone would emerge unscathed. Senior royals reacted in markedly different ways, revealing fault lines that had long been concealed beneath public unity. Some responded with visible restraint, offering measured support that felt more like acceptance than agreement. Others withdrew into silence, recalculating their positions with care. No one openly challenged the shift, but the absence of challenge spoke volumes. This was not a moment for dissent. It was a moment for survival within a reordered structure. Behind the scenes, subtle divisions began to form. Conversations that once flowed freely grew cautious. Invitations narrowed. Information traveled selectively. Family members who had aligned closely with Camilla found themselves reassessing their proximity to power, unsure whether loyalty would now be viewed as liability. The atmosphere thickened with unspoken questions about trust, allegiance, and relevance. It became clear that the monarchy's internal relationships were being quietly redrawn. The emotional strain on King Charles was unmistakable. Though decisive in action, he bore the weight of its consequences heavily. Family gatherings lost their ease. Private moments carried an undercurrent of tension. Charles understood that while the decision had stabilized the institution, it had unsettled the family that surrounded it. The cost of leadership, once abstract, had become painfully tangible. He had restored order, but at the expense of harmony. Camilla's isolation within the family structure deepened with each passing day. Without constitutional authority, her role became ambiguous, and ambiguity breeds distance. She remained present, yet peripheral. Conversations adjusted around her. Decisions moved forward without her input. This was not exile, but it was separation. The shift reinforced a painful reality: family within the monarchy is conditional, defined as much by role as by blood or bond. Throughout this upheaval, Anne maintained a firm distance from personal drama. She did not insert herself into family disputes or attempt to soften emotional fallout. Her focus remained squarely on duty. That detachment, while effective institutionally, heightened the emotional contrast within the family. Some interpreted it as coldness. Others saw it as necessary discipline. Anne neither clarified nor defended her stance. Her authority did not depend on understanding, it depended on execution. Foreshadowing lingered in the way interactions evolved. These were not temporary adjustments. The realignment of roles had set processes in motion that would shape relationships for years to come. Trust, once strained, does not easily recover, and the monarchy, now operating under firmer boundaries, would demand further sacrifices from those within its orbit. As the family adjusted to this new reality, a shared realization began to surface. Power had been recentered, and with it came new expectations, new limits, and new consequences. The monarchy had stabilized itself, but the family would carry the aftershocks long after the dust settled. And with the monarchy recentered under Anne's authority, one question began echoing louder than all others. This decision was never just about Camilla. It was about survival. By ending her constitutional role, King Charles signaled a fundamental shift in how power will be exercised moving forward. The monarchy is no longer guided by personal relationships but by institutional necessity. And that change may determine whether it endures or fractures. What followed was a quiet but unmistakable recalibration of values at the heart of the crown. Structure began to outweigh sentiment in ways not seen for generations. Where personal bonds once softened decisions, clarity now sharpened them. The monarchy, long accused of clinging to emotion under the guise of tradition, appeared to correct course. This was not a rejection of family, but a reassertion of function. And for an institution built on continuity, function is survival. Princess Anne's role became central to restoring confidence internally first, then outwardly. Inside palace walls, her authority brought relief to those who feared drift and indecision. Processes stabilized, responsibilities aligned. There was comfort in predictability again. Externally, the signal was equally powerful. The monarchy appeared decisive, controlled, and willing to confront its own vulnerabilities. That perception alone altered the conversation surrounding its future. Subtle signals suggested that this would not be an isolated correction. Once boundaries are reinforced, they invite scrutiny elsewhere. Advisors began reassessing other grey areas that had long gone unchallenged. Roles once defined loosely were reconsidered. Influence once assumed was re-examined. The monarchy entered a phase of internal audit, quietly preparing for further adjustments that would prioritize resilience over familiarity. One of the most significant shifts was the reduced role of consort influence going forward. Camilla's removal established a precedent that proximity to the monarch does not guarantee constitutional authority. That distinction mattered deeply. It restored a separation between partnership and power, reinforcing that governance cannot be shaped by personal alignment alone. For future generations, the message was clear. The institution stands above individual relationships, no matter how significant. For King Charles, this move reframed his legacy in real time. Long viewed as cautious, even hesitant, he now appeared willing to act decisively when the crown demanded it. This was not a king preserving comfort, it was a monarch prioritizing endurance. History may debate the emotional cost, but it will not overlook the clarity of intent. Charles demonstrated that stewardship sometimes requires sacrifice, even when that sacrifice cuts close. Foreshadowing lingered heavily over the monarchy's next chapter. Institutions that survive moments like this rarely stop with a single reform. Momentum builds. Expectations shift. Once authority is reclaimed, it invites further discipline. The crown, having corrected one imbalance, now faces others waiting just beneath the surface. The question is no longer whether change will continue, but how far it will go. This moment will be remembered not for what was taken away, but for what was restored: boundaries, clarity, and institutional resolve. Whether that restoration strengthens unity or exposes deeper fractures remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the monarchy has crossed a threshold it cannot retreat from. Because once constitutional authority is reclaimed, it rarely stops with just one decision. With one decisive act, King Charles reasserted the crown not through ceremony, but through consequence. Camilla's constitutional chapter closed quietly, while Princess Anne stepped into a role shaped by discipline and restraint. The monarchy did not collapse, it recalibrated. And in doing so, it revealed a truth few expected: power within the royal family still answers to duty, not devotion. The lasting impact of this decision rippled outward with a clarity that could not be ignored. Structures tightened, expectations sharpened. The crown's authority, once softened by personal proximity, reclaimed its formal weight. What had been uncertain became fixed. What had been implied became explicit. In restoring boundaries, Charles didn't just correct a role, he reset the monarchy's internal compass, signaling that endurance would be measured by coherence rather than comfort. Princess Anne emerged as the stabilizing force the moment demanded. Her presence quieted speculation and steadied operations, not through reassurance but through reliability. She embodied continuity without compromise, reinforcing the idea that governance thrives when responsibility is precise. Under her oversight, the institution regained a sense of rhythm: predictable, deliberate, and resilient. It was not warmth that returned, but confidence, and in moments like this, confidence matters more. Camilla's constitutional presence diminished without spectacle, yet the absence carried weight. The quietness of the transition underscored its finality. Influence once exercised informally no longer shaped outcomes. The monarchy did not erase her from its story, but it removed her from its machinery. That distinction between belonging and authority became the defining lesson of this chapter, one that future generations would study carefully. The monarchy's return to rigid structure was not a retreat into the past. It was an adaptation for survival. Clear lines replaced blurred ones. Procedure replaced preference. In choosing order, the crown reclaimed its capacity to withstand pressure without fragmenting. This was not rigidity for its own sake, but discipline as defense, a recognition that flexibility without limits invites instability. Yet beneath the correction lay an undeniable emotional cost. Decisions of this magnitude always extract a price. Relationships strained. Trust shifted. Silence settled where conversation once flowed. Charles carried that weight visibly, understanding that leadership often demands outcomes that feel cold to preserve something greater. The crown stood firmer, but the human toll remained, etched into the spaces where warmth once lived. Foreshadowing lingered in the aftermath. Institutions that recalibrate rarely stop at one adjustment. The logic that justified this decision will invite others. The questions it answered will raise new ones. As the monarchy steadies itself, it does so knowing that vigilance must replace complacency, and clarity must remain constant. The path forward is not gentler, but it is steadier. History will mark this moment not for the noise it made, but for the line it drew. The crown chose order over affection, structure over sentiment, endurance over ease. And in that choice, it reminded the world that monarchy, at its core, is not sustained by closeness, but by consequence. Because when the monarchy chooses order over affection, history never forgets the moment it happened. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.